Hello, crypto world! Welcome to the Chart Historian. My name is Justin, and on this channel, I delve deep into crypto charts, exploring chart structures, fractals, and patterns. This is going to be an XRP video. If you're a follower of this channel, I am making an important video because I'm pivoting. I'm pivoting to something different. My thoughts on what XRP is doing is no longer the same. Let me give you a hint of what I believe is coming down the pike. Bam! Does this look familiar, people? Here's a hint. Range-bound time. If this is at play, this is really good news because it means a new bull run is not too far away. So what is a range-bound time? Well, a range-bound time is a season or a time that exists after a decline and before the next bull run. So the XRP macro structure, which is a repetitive structure, has three parts to it: a bull run, a decline, and a range-bound time. We can see that it repeats. Price moves up again, it's a bull run, followed by a decline, followed by another range-bound time. These seasons can play out on different time frames. So for instance, we have this very large range-bound time, but then we have a very small range-bound time over here. If we go back to the very beginning of the chart, we can see the same thing plays out over and over again. A bull run followed by a decline, followed by a range-bound time. It just continues to repeat. So if there's a sequence to these seasons, then we have to make sure that today's chart, what I think is potentially another range-bound time, has a decline that comes before it and another bull run that comes before that. So before we go back to today's chart and examine what is going on there, we need to first understand what a bull run does. So XRP has a repetitive structure in its bull runs. This is on a small time frame back in 2021. So I'm using charts.cointrader-pro. It's a free program, and it allows me to go back to the very beginning of the XRP chart on a small time frame. I'm on an hour candle. You have to be on a small time frame to study what the repetitive structure is for XRP bull runs. So here is the end of that sideways range-bound time. Price starts moving up aggressively, and it has pullbacks along the way. Let me move this out of the way. So there are pullbacks along the way, but once you get to the largest pullback that exists after that move up from that sideways range-bound time, you enter into the first corrective structure in the bull run. These corrective structures are really just kind of bull run consolidations that take place within the greater bull run. So you have your first one, you have your second one. Now, these structures can play out different and will play out different every single time. They'll look unique every single time, but what repeats is the ideas. The first, second, and third corrections always take place. They look different every single time. However, there are some commonalities. So a repeating theme that takes place in the second corrective structure is it has two parts to it. You have your first one, it moves up, and then you have your second one. Either one of these can be the larger of the two. Your third corrective structure happens after it gets above the second corrective structure, and then this is where, if you're on a small time frame like an hour candle, you can count 7 moves to the peak. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. 7 brings it to the peak. You have your primary peak here, it declines, and then you have 2 smaller peaks or waves or bounces before the decline begins. So that is what an XRP bull run structure looks like. In fact, we can go to today's bull run structure, the last one that just took place, and find these same ideas repeat. Let's do that. Okay, so here we are on today's chart. Now, until recently, my belief was that we were in the third corrective structure. So all of this was the third corrective structure. Here's why I believe that what I am going to do now is a better explanation to what is happening than this theory that I've had. So it's my belief now that this is how it's playing out. Let's zoom in on a smaller time frame. Okay, so here we are on an hour candle. This is why I believe this is the better way. So you have your range-bound time, price starts moving up. Out of that range-bound time, you have your small pullbacks. Once we get to the largest of all the pullbacks that came before it, we know we're in the first bull run correction. So we get above the high of this first bull run corrective structure, and then we enter into the second one. The second one has the two parts to it. Here's the lower part, it moves up. Here's the upper part. In this case, the lower one was the larger of the two. It finally gets above that second corrective structure, enters into the third corrective structure. Once it gets above this high, it goes to the peak. We should be able to find 7 moves to the peak. Let's zoom in and look for those. Okay, so here we are. So we don't count this because it pokes its head above the high of the previous third corrective structure, but then it falls right back below it. It needs to be above the third corrective structure, and it needs to be going vertical. That's the important thing. So this is going vertical. So we can start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Let's zoom in and get a closer look at that. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't count any of this because it's in the shadow of this larger pullback. 5, 6, and 7. So now let's talk about the peak. So here is your initial peak, and then you have the two smaller waves or smaller peaks here. If you recall, back when this had just played out, and I thought that this could potentially be the peak back in, I guess, January, February, March, I was whining that this could be the peak because we had 7 moves to it. It got above the third corrective structure. And this, while it was sloppy and it didn't look very pretty, still could have been the peak. I continued with that limbo state in my analysis until we got to the point where, let me zoom out, until we got to the point where it got above the current high. Okay, so we know that this fits the bill of what an XRP bull run structure looks like, does. It matches it beautifully. What is all this? So if this is the peak, then we should have a decline and a range-bound time in all of this. Let's see if we can find a decline. If we can't find a decline, then none of this works. Okay, so we're back at the very first bull run on the XRP chart. You can see the chart starts right here. So the very first bull run. Now you may be wondering, well, why do we need to look for a decline? It clearly declined on the chart. Not all declines are created equal. An XRP decline has a set of waves or bounces that it does, and believe it or not, it's a repetitive structure. So we have to see if what took place on today's chart actually fits the bill for what an XRP decline should look like. Now, to be fair, no fractal will ever repeat identically, so you have to allow for originality in the structure. But having said that, we can still look for commonality. So your first one is A. So I label these fractals from A to F. Now, sometimes A is just so small, it's hard to see it. On a larger time frame, like a day candle, you won't be able to see it. So sometimes I don't show it. Here is A. It's basically a steep drop. Here's B. They all look kind of similar to each other. Here is C. Here is D. There is something unique about D. So you see it moves up and then it drops and then it moves back up again and it creates like this bowl type structure and then it kind of continues the decline. So E, the closer you get usually to the end of the decline, the larger the fractals can, not always, but sometimes be. So here's E and here's F. What we can do is we can take each of these fractals and copy and paste them onto today's chart and see if it does have any resemblance. Okay, so here we are back on TradingView, and here are the way I believe these structures play out. So let's copy and paste the fractals onto these from that first initial decline and see how they compare. Okay, so here is the first fractal, fractal A, and it's pretty much just a bounce, like a declining bounce. Here is B, so let's zoom in a little closer. We can see that it does follow the basic profile, so that checks out. Here is C, and once again, that follows that original profile. The original structures that first get printed on a chart are really important because it's those structures that get copied and repeat over and over again. Of course, they play out uniquely every single time they repeat, but the basic idea continues to repeat, as we can see with these structures here. So here is D, and here's the fractal with that drop, and then it moves up, creating the bowl in the fractal. On today's chart, it moves up, it drops, moves back up again, and here's that bowl structure, and then it continues declining down to a low. Let's move on. So here is E. Now, there's things that I don't like about today's E and today's F. So on today's chart, instead of continuing the decline, it actually ends higher when it finishes the structure than where it began, so it's moving up. Having said that, it still does follow the basic profile. And to be fair, it's done this in the past. Let me look at F, and then we'll compare a place where it actually didn't continue dropping lower in the past, and you can see how this is not the first time this has happened. So here is F. F is the termination of the decline. In this case, it was more of a bounce. And then we go into the range-bound time. Let's quickly look at some of those times where E and F were not necessarily the low of the decline. So back in this decline, which took place, it started in May, and it went all the way to August of 2017, we see the low is reached in D, and E and F are not lower than D. This is exactly what's taking place on today's chart. Let's zoom out and get a better view of this. So here is a better view of this, and this is actually just the small little decline and range-bound time that took place in between these two bull runs. You may be used to seeing it like this, or maybe like this. So this, believe it or not, is the area that many analysts have been comparing what XRP is doing today back to. And the strange thing is I have been critical of them for doing this. Now, granted, when they, at least the ones that I saw, took their fractals and stretched it on today's chart, I would look at that and say, nope, 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 that is not what's playing out. They had it stretched smaller, but I just find it funny how the things you're critical of later, in this case, you're embracing. Having said that, I did not have enough data on the chart to accept that this was at play, and the homogenistic big picture fractal, that is a bad way to do fractal analysis. The devil is in the details. You will either prove what you are showing in the details, or you'll disprove it in the details. So always remember that. Drill down into the small nuances of it, and that's where the truth will lie. So what made me realize that something like this was in play, believe it or not, was this drop. It was this drop, and then realizing, hey, something like that happens in the third range-bound structure. So then I started putting the puzzle pieces together, and this is where it leads. So now let's talk about the range-bound time. So this range-bound time is what leads eventually into the next bull run. That's why this is so exciting. Let's go back and view previous range-bound times so we can get an understanding of what happens. All right, it's a little confusing, but we can see what we need to see with the range-bound times because they're usually so big. So your first structure, price moves up after the decline, and you have an initial kind of peak, which is part A, and then it declines, and it either goes flat like this or it arches down, and that's part B. In the next structure, there's three waves: wave A, wave B, and wave C. And then finally, in the third structure, this one has the most deviations, I think, out of all the three structures. Price moves up to a peak or a high point, which is part A. It then crashes or declines, which is part B. Sometimes it declines, sometimes it crashes. It then moves back up and does a recovery of sorts, and then it does a second correction. Usually it's smaller, and then it goes into the bull run. So we could see the same idea repeating here. So price moves up once it ends the decline, and then you have your first peak, which is part A. It declines, and in this case, it kind of goes flat, which is part B. In Fractal 2, you have the three waves: wave A, wave B, and look at C. C is just massive. Wave C, and then it declines. And then in the final third fractal, price moves up to a peak. And then this one just took forever. And then it finally declined to the low, which was B. This was so painful. And by the time we got here, people just thought this was an S coin. It went through so long, through all of this junk, and it was just like the worst thing ever. No one wanted to hear about it. Eventually, it recovered and did this kind of smaller, well, it was quite large, another kind of correction. It didn't drop so much on this one, but then finally it moves into the bull run. So there's an example of two different ones. We can look at another one. So this was kind of in the early days of the chart in 2015. So price moves up after the decline to a peak, which is part A. It then declines, and this one, part B, arches down. Here we have the second fractal, which has three waves: wave A, wave B, and wave C. Notice how it plays out different every single time. In the third fractal, price moves up to a peak, which is part A. It then declines, which is part B. It then moves up, recovers, does a smaller correction, and goes into the bull run. Okay, so here we are on today's chart. So price moves up to a peak, which is part A, and then it declines and then arches down, which is part B. In the second fractal, we have three waves: wave A, wave B, and wave C. And then in the third fractal, price moves up to a peak, which is part A, and then it crashes. Yes, it crashed, which is part B. And now we're kind of working our way through this part where it's the low, but eventually it recovers. Now, I don't know if this is part of the recovery, or I think it could move up higher, maybe recover to around here, and then go into a smaller correction. It's typically smaller, and then it goes into the bull run. What I don't like about this range-bound time this time around is look how high this moved up. It went higher than the previous peak. This is just weird. We need to talk about this peak structure. This, no matter how you cut it, this is just odd. It's my belief that this peak right here is a distortion of this structure. Every time a fractal plays out, the timing, height, and depth is going to be unique. So in theory, it leaves room for this kind of stuff, but it's not normal. It's never done this before. If this is what is at play. If you're going to play the devil's advocate or try to poke holes in this theory, this would be one of them. It moves up so high that it's never moved up this high, where it went above the previous bull run peak in the range-bound time. But say we were going with my original analysis to where I thought this entire thing was a range-bound, or the third corrective structure. I still think that is kind of a strange thing, this peak. Where in a third corrective structure have we seen it peak and then it declines and then it peaks higher and then it declines again? Nowhere. I'll tell you that right now. Nowhere in the third corrective structure have we seen that. So it's just a weird peak. And even if you say this was the peak, well, we don't have the 7 moves to the peak here. So this is clearly not the peak. That 7 moves has happened on every single bull run structure. So just based on that, we know that this can't be the peak. It's my belief that this is a range-bound time, and this is just a distortion. It moved up very high, which is a first. But yeah, if you're going to make a argument against this idea, this would be something you could use as ammunition to say it's never done this before, and you'd be right about that. So what's exciting about this, and hear me out, this is important. Once this recovers, does a small correction, and enters into the bull run, the slate is wiped clean. We don't know how high this can move up. It's going to move up a lot higher than if this was just one massive third corrective structure. The most it's ever moved above the high of that third corrective structure is 80-something%. But if it's a new bull run, it opens the door for all kinds of stuff. A strength to this idea is that this bull run, while it still qualifies as the largest bull run in XRP's history, it's not the largest by a long shot. So if we were to measure the bull run by the candle, the daily candle that gets above the high of this recovery after the crash, start measuring and go all the way to the peak, this one lasted 65 days. The next closest one is, believe it or not, the one that is the most similar to this one, the one that people have been comparing back to, which is 48 days. So there's another commonality between these two parts of the XRP chart. Essentially, this is what we could potentially have coming down the pike. Now, I don't know how high it will go, but it has potential to be quite exciting. This one only lasted 23 days. All right, folks, so there you have it. That's my argument. I think it solves some problems, namely with the bull run lasting a normal amount of time. It also is quite clear with the range-bound structure. It's clearly doing that, in my opinion. I don't like how high it moved up in the range-bound time. But the good news is that we are near the bull run. You know, this crash in the third range-bound structure, it enhances and it just promotes despair, discouragement, frustration, fear. This is where people kind of lose it in this fractal. You know, speaking of emotions, crypto is not kind to investors. It tosses you around like a rag doll when it comes to emotions such as fear, anxiety. My advice is you need to find a ballast. A ballast on a ship, it provides stability and safety so it can withstand the waves in the ocean. That's what we need in crypto. You know, things that help increase my ballast and increase my faith is things like Psalms, reading the Psalms. David was an amazing person, but you read the Psalms and it's like reading his diary, and you just see these emotions of fear and despair sometimes. But then you also get stuff that's just really faith-building as well. So, I don't know. Stuff like that helps me. You might find it helpful as well. But whatever you do, you need a strong ballast to withstand the intense emotions that come in the crypto space. All right, so back to the chart. I think if this continues to play out, we have an amazing time. It may not last very long. We got to remember the big picture, the indexes, they're working out their peak structure. I think we could get through this year without seeing the big declines, but understand that it's not too far away. But when a bull run does happen, it usually is pretty quick. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, it'd be much appreciated if you hit that thumbs up button. This is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. If you did find this video interesting and you're not yet a subscriber, I recommend hitting that subscribe button. If you would like to be part of my Discord, it's connected to my Patreon. It's a $5 a month subscription. I'll put a link to my Patreon in the description of this video. I'm so glad you caught this video. I hope you catch my next one. Have a great day, and bye for now.